Hello and welcome to this week's Nerdman podcast. And this week I'm going to be talking about DC versus Marvel and basically their film universes, filmverse, multiverse. They have different names. Anyways, that's what I'm talking about this week. So, as I said, I'm going to be talking about DC versus Marvel in their movie universes and sort of what I think about the movies as they've come in the past and as they are now and maybe where they're going in the future. And to begin with, I think I am just going to give you a little history with DC and Marvel movies, at least my history with them. You know, this stuff all started years ago. I remember when the first X-Men came out, for instance, and I may have some dates a little bit off on here, but I remember thinking how awesome it was to see the X-Men movie and Wolverine for the first time and stuff. Of course, I was disappointed by sort of the timeline and the liberties taken in the series, and they weren't wearing their costumes. It was, this realism thing. I think for a long time, Hollywood did this realism thing. But I guess I should go back even further because I think Batman, the Michael Keaton Batman, was probably really one of the first ones that sort of pushed forward with, and that's with the superhero movies being sort of possible, I guess, in a sense, because even prior to that, so I'm going back even further here. I mean, I saw like The Flash and Captain America and cheesy old Spider-Man stuff. There was a Spider-Man, I think it was a live action TV show. There was Captain America, The Flash, like I said. These, Hulk. I mean, I'm going way back here. Those things I remember watching, and I remember sort of liking them as a kid. I mean, I was a very young kid back then watching these things, and it was cool to see these heroes. But man, if you were to go back and watch those now, they're pretty bad. And so I think Batman, really, the Tim Burton Batman, really sort of launched the possibility of these superhero movies. And it was good. It was actually really good. It was, I think the thing with Batman is it's not too hard to get Batman right. Now, some people will argue Joel Schumacher's versions on Batman Forever and Batman and Robin were not really up to par with anything. But I'll tell you what, I still like those movies. They're still kind of fun to watch in that sort of they're bad but they're good way. So, but they haven't helped. I will grant that they haven't helped the kind of industry there, and in a way set it back until, things like X-Men started coming out, and I can't remember if there was anything before that or not. I really actually like the Ang Lee Hulk movie. I loved the way they shot that and how it actually kind of looked like a comic. Unfortunately, as with a lot of these movies, it had a terrible villain. And sometimes these movies are only as good as their villains. I mean, of course, we had Superman. Anybody who knows me, I mean, the Nerdman logo back there is basically like a Superman logo. The thing is all these movies, they all have these liberties taken. And I guess that's sort of where I'm going to move on here, the liberties. The liberties taken. It can ruin these movies. For instance, when I was younger, I think I enjoyed the Superman movies a little bit more because it was just Superman, and I guess I didn't know so much about the character. So I guess with knowledge also comes annoyance, because once you start to know more about the characters, you get more frustrated when Hollywood does something different with them. When it really comes down to it, that those Superman movies were just really not even great representations of Superman. He had powers he never had. He had character flaws and things that he didn't typically have in the comics. And I'm not going to get into that because that could be another topic for another day, me talking about Superman. But basically, all these movies, they tend to have liberties taken. The X-Men movie, when that came out, they didn't have their costumes and stuff. It was, well, let's try to be realistic. We can't be comic booky. That'll look cheesy because it'll look like Joel Schumacher's Batman movies. But I think if we jump ahead a little bit into the future, I know the Deadpool movie really sort of proved to people that, or I should say, proved to Hollywood in a sense that people want that comic book feel, but not in the Joel Schumacher way. But we want those costumes, and even one of the most recent X-Men movie, Apocalypse. At the very end of the movie, they show the characters in their kind of traditional costumes, and it looked great. I loved it. And it's like, why can't they be in those costumes for the whole movie? Why do you only show it at the end of the movie? Why are there all these liberties taken? Now, when I'm talking about liberties, though, you got to bring up movies like Blade. I know nothing about Blade, and this is sort of where I come on to the idea of, with more knowledge comes, in a sense, more frustration with these characters, because I know nothing about Blade, and what I do know is that the Blade in the Marvel movies with Wesley Snipes is not the Blade in the comics. I think they changed his origin story. They changed kind of who he is, from what I understand. And frankly, I don't care. I love those movies. They were great. They had great action. I loved Wesley Snipes in that role, and I think those were some really good movies. So I think what it really comes down to is how big is a character, and if it's a lesser known character and people don't know about them very much, I think you can get away with a lot more liberties. But when you're talking about a Superman or a Batman or Wolverine, Spider-Man, all these big ones, you can't deviate too far because so many people know them. And I think a lot of Hollywood writers, directors, they want to leave their mark with these characters and tell this, new story with them. And I think that's not a good idea. I think you can tell a new story, and in some cases I think you should tell a new story, but if you don't have sort of the essence of the character there, audiences aren't going to resonate with it. And that, I'm going to jump up ahead a little bit to DC's latest sort of movies where they don't have the characters right, and nobody's going to these movies in repeat. They have hype behind them, but once we see them, we're all disappointed and we don't go back. And it's the reason why they aren't competing with Marvel. Superman is not a dark and dreary character. He's a beacon of light and hope. Batman is a more anti-hero, darker character, but I feel in the new movies they kind of went too dark with him. So I don't think you should make a superhero movie kind of steeped in reality. They aren't real. I mean, when a man can fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes and all kinds of stuff, we're not talking about reality anymore. So I think that's where sort of DC is failing right now. I have the question on here: what do they do right and what do they do wrong? I think what they do right is presenting us these characters in a real way, in a sense, from the comic pages to real life or live action, whatever you want to call it. And some of them are really great, but I think what they do wrong is just all that stuff I said, liberties and things. I guess I'm jumping back and forth in timelines here, but I want to go back to sort of the current Marvel multiverse, as they call it, or I think, or filmverse, whatever you want to call it. But that sort of started with, I guess, Iron Man. If you really want to go back further, the second Hulk movie was really what started it, I think. But I don't think they really count that with Edward Norton. So we're going to say Iron Man. Now, Iron Man was great. And see, Marvel, they put the right people in charge. They put people in charge that knew the comic characters. And when they started mixing characters together and having these ensemble casts, it was just awesome. You wanted to see it. Was like the comics came to life, and they had the humor, they had the realism, they had everything. They had the perfect balance of these things. And now I don't know all these characters in and out, and I think one thing that helps them too is because I'm going to go ahead and say, I mean, Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, all these characters, Thor, they are what I would consider more B-list type, heroes. At least they were, until Marvel almost elevated them to A-list heroes with these movies. Because X-Men were the A-listers. That's what everybody knew in Marvel. I mean, I knew Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. I mean, I knew who they were, but X-Men were the A-listers. Those were the ones you really knew. And then Spider-Man, he's an A-lister from Marvel. I'm talking Marvel side. So when X-Men, unfortunately X-Men is owned by Fox for the movie rights, so they can't quite mesh together, and Fox has been struggling to do the right things, I think, in their Marvel movies. I couldn't even imagine if Marvel got the X-Men back into their pool to use, because Marvel just doing everything right, as far as working with Disney and stuff and the movies they're making there. But then you have the A-listers of Batman, the DC side, Superman, Wonder Woman and stuff. They're kind of your A-listers over there, and they're basically the biggest heroes of all time. I mean, when you're talking top hero list, Superman and Batman and Spider-Man are usually in the top three. And I guess I'm going to jump back here to Christopher Nolan. So Christopher Nolan relaunched Batman with Batman Begins, and I liked it. I liked Batman Begins. It worked. It was in kind of dipped in reality, a realistic, gritty world, a gritty Gotham, and it worked. The Dark Knight, it worked. It was great. Heath Ledger's Joker was pretty good and everything. I'm still not sure if I think his was the best, but I did like it. But then Christopher Nolan took those liberties and he made The Dark Knight Rises. And frankly, I think that movie is divisive. It divides people. Some like it and some, like me, hate it. I literally went to it with four of us, three friends, me and three friends. We all hated it. It was awful. It almost ruined Batman for me in that sense. It was the Joel Schumacher, movie. I would actually literally rather watch the Joel Schumacher Batmans than to have to watch The Dark Knight Rises again. Again, I don't want to stay on that for very long, but I think that was a terrible movie that took so many liberties, and it was just an utter disappointment, especially coming off that he did two good movies before it. He just messed up Bane. He messed up everything. There was origin stories with Talia, all this stuff. It was all messed up. And that's where I think the writers and the directors, they get on their high horse and they muck stuff up. And so that left, I think, they ended that trilogy and they wanted, at that time, Marvel was just ramping up, and their film universe was just expanding and exploding, and Avengers and all that stuff had come out. So DC wants to match that. Then they make Man of Steel. That we need a new Man of Steel because Superman Returns didn't do well. Again, there was liberties taken. Bryan Singer practically ruined that movie. I think Brandon Routh was a great Superman, and he mimicked sort of the Christopher Reeves Superman and everything. And honestly, that's fine. I mean, I think Christopher Reeves played a great Superman. He just had a terrible movie around him, with, again, bad liberties taken. And same thing with Superman Returns. Just bad liberties taken, bad villain. They never get Lex right. He's always, whatever. And then he, as my brother likes to say, he fights land at the end of the movie. So, I mean, Superman needs to be rebooted. So they got Man of Steel. Christopher Nolan still sort of in charge. We got Zack Snyder, and I like Zack Snyder for action. Zack doesn't always do great on story, though. And again, Man of Steel it divides people. Some people really liked it, and some really don't like it. And then you had Batman v Superman. I think a lot of people, even though it made a ton of money, it's still considered essentially a failure because, I mean, it has, I think, one of the worst second week drop-offs for sales of any movie of all time. They don't get the characters. They just don't get the characters. And so this whole thing is DC versus Marvel. That's what I'm talking about. DC versus Marvel. I have to flat out say Marvel is killing it. And DC needs to, I kind of jokingly say it, I don't want them to copy Marvel, but please copy Marvel. They need to just change their attitude. And I'm hoping things will change, and I know as of this time, if you're listening to it now, they put a new person in charge, Jeff Johns, who is sort of the guy in charge of the comics and stuff, and so they're kind of putting him in charge of the movies now and the whole DC thing. So I'm kind of hoping with that they're going to go in the right direction. I hope he's going to guide the movies. They need to just, it's going to be hard for them because they're trying to still work off what they've established. But what they've established is poopy doopy, It's not good. They need to fix Superman. They need to fix Batman. We have new heroes coming in we don't know anything about. I'm not too keen on Wonder Woman to begin with. She was never my favorite. And we'll see how her movie goes. Suicide Squad just came out. And I guess I could talk a little bit about that because I had previously was super hyped for it. And I guess what I will say about that movie is I liked it. I thought it was good fun. It was probably the best DC movie they've made in recent years. It just got sort of muddled down by the ensemble cast, essentially. There was just too many characters, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but they just didn't have enough time to really flesh them out. And I think maybe with some more movies they could, or maybe they branch them off into some solo movies or something. But, I mean, Harley Quinn was great. Loved Margot Robbie playing her. It was everything I expected it to be with Harley Quinn. Deadshot was a surprise with Will Smith. He was great. Loved his character. But the rest of them were sort of just thrown in. You didn't get enough time with them. And, that's going to happen. But overall, I enjoyed it. And I think in that case, they're moving in the right direction. Sadly, a lot of people didn't like it, though. And it still has that dividing nature. It's lost, again, almost as much as Batman versus Superman in sales from first week to second week. So we don't know where it's going to go here. I guess if you guys have some comments or ideas on this, why don't you let me know. What I expect to see in the future from these movies is just more of that comic book stuff. Keep the characters how they are in the comics, their essence. You can tell new stories, and I'm fine with that. You don't have to just pull a story from the comics. Tell a new story, be bold in that in that regard, but you need to have the essence of the character if you're going to tell a new story. You need to maintain their origins and things like that, and you need to capture what they are, what they stand for. And until they get that right, I'm not sure, I think audiences are going to slowly step away from the superhero movies. There is a bit of superhero movie fatigue already setting in, I think. It's not going to last forever, but I'm still enjoying it while it's happening. I just, wish there was a higher bar for these movies. And hopefully we're going to go there before these movies kind of begin to disappear. But let me know what you guys think. As always, subscribe to, my podcast, my YouTube videos, and share, comment. I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think on the matter. And if you're watching on YouTube, keep YouTubing it up. If you're listening to the podcast, I will talk to you next time.